I've spoken about Beetleborgs. I've spoken about 90s nostalgia many different times. Power Rangers, V Troopers, even though I never VR Troopers, even though I never saw it. But Mystic Knights was also my jam, and Mystic Knights was like Power Rangers, but it took place in medieval times, and they were more of the elements, so they were like water, fire, earth, and air. And like they were knights, but it's kind of funny because the armor, well, that's medieval times, so they're not gonna have the high tech armor covered up. No, they're gonna be dressed up as not exactly like knights, but enough to have the armor, like the shoulder pads, the knee pads. They had the masks and stuff like that. And you had the girl. She was pink. She was blue. Yeah, she was blue, and she had water. And she'd go, the water around me, things like that. The earth below me, the air above me, all that stuff. That was their element. I know 2 of the guys, they were like Aladdin, they were street rats, but they knew the princess, the pink, I believe she was pink or blue. It's been a while. But they knew her since childhood. And they had been fighting evil since childhood, but they weren't knights. They were little kids, At first they were kids and they were using what they had. Now they're older and they became, the knights, the Mystic Knights. I believe. So the girl had a crossbow. I know that. One had an axe. The other one a sword, and I think the other one was. It may have been a bow and arrow. It was a long time ago, a very long time ago. It was on Fox Kids. I believe, like Beetleborgs, they only had 2 seasons. And it didn't last that long. It was very short-lived. You also had another guy, I believe he was, because you had red, pink or blue, and then you had dark blue, and then you had green, and you had one of the knights was a thief, and he became, a Mystic Knight. I remember some people saying, this was a long time ago where I was watching their transformations, someone said they should have had a Shadow Knight, and he would have had, the power of the shadows and things like that. That would have been cool, but yeah, this show was on Fox Kids, I think, 97, 98. So I was about, 3, 4 years old watching it, maybe even 5. But yeah, it was one of those shows that, they stuck with you. Yeah, it's been a long time. Mystic Knights was, the kids nowadays, they're not going to know these kind of shows, if you're a 90s kid or an early 2000s kid, you grew up during the time, actually see things change right in front of you. I grew up with, and I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one, with the flip phones. We used to have the flip phones, and then they turned into the Blackberries, where you push up the keyboards. We didn't have, like, when we used to have the flip phones or like the normal phones that, it was like, it wasn't a flip phone. It became with like a, kind of like this, but it had buttons on front, and then you had to click a button a certain amount of times just to get the letter when you texted. And then the keyboards came in, so if you had the rent, you would click the keyboard up and you go this way. Or you had the Blackberry, you would, flip the keyboard up, and then you text this way. It was one of those, times were changing, and you kind of grew up. Some of the stuff was cool. I mean, I grew up with the dial tone internet, where like like if you were on the internet, no one was allowed to make a phone call because you were on the internet. No calls would go through. If someone was on the phone, you couldn't connect to the internet. That's how ancient the landline phone dial tone was. That's the sound of the internet connecting. That's where we grew up. Now we got Wi-Fi. You know, um, yeah. Before we used to have the cord phone, like the big ass lumpy phone. The rotary phones, or like the ones on the in the kitchen, where you would either have the number pad on the actual phone itself, or like on the what was it, the receiver end, whatever you call it, where you put the phone down and hang up. I don't know, but you had it there and you will talk. I remember that the rotary phone. I remember. I don't think we own one, but I do remember using one. I do remember. I know how to use a fax machine. Surprisingly, that was before email ever came along. We had to fax stuff over. Yeah, because like the email, you had to log onto the internet, and people didn't have time for that, so they would fax things over. I know most houses they would have a telephone, an answering machine, which you had that one cassette tape. That one cassette tape, I remember that. Now everything's all voicemail now. But yeah, I know some people would have the the message thingy, the message machine. There we go, and fax machine. Especially people worked at home in the office and they were able to do so. Yeah, it's amazing how all the things in the '90s that were strived to do are now possible now. But at what cost? I don't know. That's just me. But yeah, Mystic Knights was a show on Fox Kids. It had 2 seasons. I think 98, 99 is when it ended. So, yeah. Yeah, Mystic Knights was a good show. And most of these shows, not many kids know about it unless you go on YouTube or someone who watched it, had a parent, an uncle. Yeah, but Mystic Knights, yeah, they don't make them like they used to anymore.